The Catalan football giant is one of the most recognizable sports brands on the planet. In addition to such an honorable status, it possesses a unique feature. Unlike most other top clubs, the lion's share of Barcelona's success is associated with one person. And no, it's not Lionel Messi, as many young viewers might think. The greatest figure in Barcelona's history is Johan Cruyff. In today's video, we will tell you about how the current Barcelona began, how the Catalan club experienced several periods of unrivaled greatness and prosperity, and how the blue and garnet team coped with periods of crisis and consistently returned to the top. For Barcelona fans, the 1960s were marked by agonizing defeats and ridicule from the dominating capital. The despised Real Madrid won a total of 8 league titles in one decade, while Blaugranas had the same number for the entire time of their existence. Barcelona started the new decade in the same unfortunate reputation of a loser. But in the fall of 1973, an event happened that forever changed the history of the blue and garnet. Johan Cruyff, the strongest football player on the planet at that time, arrived at Camp Nou. The Dutchman made his first big step towards winning the hearts of the Blaugranas even before he first wore the blue and garnet jersey. Ajax had already agreed with Real Madrid about Cruyff's transfer. However, he ultimately refused to move to Madrid. Johan couldn't break the promise given to his teacher, Rinus Michels, who was sitting in Barcelona's coaching chair. Rarely does the arrival of one player, even a great one, fundamentally influence a team's game. But this was an exceptional player and an exceptional case. Before buying Cruyff, Barcelona had not tasted championship glory for a full 14 years, and the 73-74 season started disastrously. But Johan instilled a winning spirit in his new teammates, changed their mindset, and became a Real football messiah for all of Catalonia with his first attempt, winning the title. Circumstances unfolded such that for the next 4 years the Dutchman could not repeat his feat and left the club. But his story of love and commitment to Barcelona was far from over. In May 1988, Cruyff returned to Camp Nou, this time as a coach, to finally change the future of Blaugranas. From Cruyff's departure until his return in a different role, 10 years passed. During this period, the Catalans were in the shadow of Real Madrid, winning only one league title. The Madrileños particularly dominated in the mid-80s, establishing themselves on the Spanish throne for 5 seasons. The last 2 years of this period already saw the activity of Johan, who, although he did not win the title on the first try, did not remain trophyless in his debut season. Despite not the most favorable atmosphere in the club, Cruyff managed to win the Cup Winners' Cup. His tactical philosophy of ball control immediately appealed to players and fans. When the Dutch maestro arrived, Barcelona was not in the best financial position, and attendance at Camp Nou was suffering due to poor results. But Johan restored faith in a bright future for the fans and management, so he had the opportunity to make several transfers to his liking. Cruyff's choice fell on the scoring defender Ronald Koeman, with whom he had previously worked at Ajax, as well as on the brilliant playmaker Michael Laudrup. Despite targeted reinforcement and improvement of the game in many aspects, Blaugranas in the 89-90 draw again failed to overthrow Real Madrid. But, as in the debut campaign, Johan did not leave the team without trophies. The Catalans won the Copa del Rey, beating the Blancos 2-0 in the final. Cruyff managed to break Real Madrid's 5-year reign in La Liga in the next 90-91 season, making several successful personnel decisions. And if promoting young Josep Guardiola from the youth team to the first team looked like a step towards the future, then buying Hristo Stoichkov directly influenced the outcome of the championship race. The Bulgarian adapted exceptionally well in Barcelona, scoring 22 goals, 14 of which were in the Spanish championship. After a long dominance of Real Madrid, the long-awaited championship became a matter of great pride for the Blaugranas fans. But in the following 91-92 campaign, it turned out that Johan had prepared a much more significant surprise for them, a golden double. This time the battle for the title of the strongest team in Spain was exciting and unpredictable. Each team on the podium was separated by just 1 point. But Barcelona still managed to outperform both Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid. The Catalans' most significant triumph was celebrated in the European arena, in the final against Sampdoria. Now the name Sampdoria does not sound very intimidating, but in the early 90s, this team was one of the best in Serie A, which they proved in the final. After a goalless main time, the match's winner was determined thanks to the individual skill of Koeman, who scored a beautiful goal from a free kick in overtime. This was Barcelona's first victory in the Champions Cup, elevating Cruyff to new heights of adoration. During his playing career, Johan was the main embodiment of total football, and many principles of this concept he implemented in his coaching approach. Convinced that dominating football is the key to victory, he focused his charges on possession, ball control, and combinations. The foundational element of Cruyff's tactical model was the so-called triangles. Each player, regardless of his position on the field, had to be positioned to form this geometric figure. Thanks to this, the team could possess the ball for a long time, as any footballer always had two options for passing. Guardiola, who became a key player in the triumphant 91-92 season, was crucial in implementing this approach. Josep did not have outstanding speed or physical data, but Cruyff, for whom positioning was most important, valued the young midfielder for his intelligence and ability to create these very triangles. Johan's vibrant team was called the Dream Team, and this nickname suited them, because, after all, football is a spectacle, and the Dream Team invariably provided it to all viewers. At the same time, Cruyff's Barcelona did not play particularly well in defense, but they were unmatched in attack. In the 92-93 La Liga season, the Catalans traditionally scored much more than the rest and won their third consecutive league title, but in the Champions League, they sensationally did not even make it into the top 8, prompting Johan to once again turn his gaze to the transfer market. Previously, the Dutchman often managed magical signings, but with Romario, he outdid himself. The PSV forward became the final piece of the great Dream Team. And here it is important to understand that by buying the Brazilian, Cruyff, in a way, stepped on the throat of his own song. Before his transfer, the most important element of Barcelona's attacking line was Laudrup, playing as a false nine. But with the purchase of Romario, Johan had a player who was too good to be left on the bench. The situation was complicated by the limit of 3 foreign players in Spain. Cruyff had to make a choice in favor of the newcomer, and this decision had serious consequences. In the 93-94 season, the Catalans won the league title, but not without difficulty. Deportivo scored the same number of points but lost on goal difference. Barca showed sparkling football, scoring and conceding a lot, and Romario delivered a fantastic performance. The Brazilian became the top scorer of La Liga, scoring a total of 30 times, with some of his goals being true masterpieces. It seemed that no one could stop the incredible Barcelona. The Blaugranas did not just win, but sometimes destroyed opponents. But still, one team managed to do it. Much to the disappointment of the Catalans, it was the Champions League final, in which a depleted Milan somehow inexplicably crushed Cruyff's brainchild with a stunning 4-0 score. The strange, sensational defeat to the Rossoneri turned out to be a turning point in Johan's tenure at Camp Nou. The long-standing club president Josep Luis Núñez was jealous of the Dutchman's successes and, seizing the opportunity, immediately criticized his strategy for the final match. The atmosphere in the Barcelona locker room was also not the best. Laudrup was unhappy with the amount of playing time and moved to Real Madrid in the summer, and during the 94-95 season, Cruyff's relationship with Romario deteriorated, and in January, the Brazilian moved to Flamengo, which significantly affected the team's results. After 4 years on the Spanish throne, the Blaugranas dropped to 4th place. Against the backdrop of such an obvious failure, many thought that Johan would leave. However, he did not want to part with his creation. The Dutchman was not even stopped by the sale of such important and experienced players as Koeman and Siki Begiristain. Cruyff tackled the job with the same enthusiasm. Signing a number of interesting players, led by the promising Luis Figo, Cruyff decided to prove that even without the key elements, the Dream Team could win. But, unfortunately, he failed. Although the 95-96 campaign turned out to be more successful than the previous one, the Catalans still could not win a single trophy. In La Liga, Barca finished in third place, after which they lost in the Copa del Rey final. If a season earlier Núñez just expressed dissatisfaction with Johan's work, now he could show him the door without strong condemnation from the public. The president did not like that Cruyff's powers and influence went far beyond the usual functions of a coach, so he fired him, despite all his merits, thus drawing a line under the most successful period in Blaugrana's history at that time. Considering the favorable experience of working with coaches from the Netherlands, Núñez decided to continue the Dutch course. He tried to lure Louis van Gaal, who sensationally won the Champions League with Ajax, but the young coach was bound by a current contract and had to work another year in Amsterdam. Having failed, Núñez switched to Bobby Robson, who had already twice had the opportunity to be at Barcelona. In both cases, the Englishman refused the Catalan club, but on the third attempt, he finally agreed. Together with him at Camp Nou, Robson brought an assistant, the then unknown José Mourinho, and also played a key role in the transfer that determined the success of Blaugrana's in the upcoming 96-97 campaign. The president told me, "We need a first-class striker. Do you know where to find one?" I replied that yes, there is one young guy at PSV who impressed me. I consider him a fantastic footballer, Sir Bobby later recalled. As you have already guessed, that young forward was named Ronaldo. Barcelona had to break the transfer record, paying $19.5 million for the Brazilian, but money did not matter, he was simply priceless. Barely stepping onto the Camp Nou pitch, Ronaldo helped the Catalans win the Spanish Super Cup, scoring twice against Atletico Madrid, and then set about destroying opponents on all fronts. Barcelona won the Copa del Rey and the Cup Winners' Cup, and the Brazilian regularly scored in each of the tournaments, including the only goal in the final against PSG. But the most colorful goal festival was staged by the phenomenon in La Liga, where he distinguished himself 34 times in 37 matches. But even such a cosmic indicator did not help Barcelona win the league title. Robson's charges valiantly fought with Real Madrid for the trophy, but towards the end of the tournament distance, they stumbled in a match with the already relegated Hercules, and ultimately finished 2 points behind the creamy ones. Given that Sir Bobby initially arrived at Camp Nou as a temporary solution, no one expected global changes from him, but in reality, the English coach managed to do fundamental work, the value of which over time became even higher. In addition to the successful integration of Ronaldo, Robson paid special attention to the adaptation of Luis Enrique. At first, it seemed that it would be very difficult for him to become part of the Catalan mechanism, but Sir Bobby made it so that the midfielder, coming from the hostile Madrid, very quickly ceased to be a stranger and harmoniously complemented the playing pattern of the new team. If in the previous 5 years at Real Madrid, Enrique scored a total of 15 goals in La Liga, then in the debut campaign at Camp Nou immediately as many as 17. It was thanks to Robson's efforts that Luis successfully played in Barcelona, where he eventually became an iconic figure, first as a player and then as a coach. The Englishman's coaching approach, his ability to manage a team, as well as cope with stress and pressure, became a benchmark for Enrique in his future coaching work. Sir Bobby also had a significant influence on Guardiola. Undoubtedly, Cruyff was Josep's main teacher, but with Johan, he mainly absorbed tactical knowledge and philosophy, while Robson showed Pep the mental side of coaching and inspired him to choose this craft after the end of his playing career. Now, years later, Robson's contribution to Barcelona's success is beyond doubt, but then no one thought about the future. Current results were important. Yes, Sir Bobby brought trophies, after which Núñez even thought about extending the contract with the Englishman, but due to existing agreements, Louis van Gaal became the coach of Barcelona in the summer of '97. The management had high hopes for Louis, so they allowed him to invite several Dutchmen and did not skimp on two extra-class strikers, Sonny Anderson and Rivaldo cost Barcelona a fortune, but the task before the new coach was corresponding, to win trophies and, first of all, the championship title. Van Gaal's debut season at Camp Nou turned out to be controversial. On the one hand, the Catalans failed spectacularly in the Champions League, taking an embarrassingly last place in the quartet, but on the other, they still won La Liga and the Copa del Rey, so overall they were satisfied with Luis's work. The next 98-99 season was very similar to the previous one. Barcelona, again, failed to overcome the group stage of the main European Cup, but confidently defended the league title on the domestic arena. And this was very important for Van Gaal, as his decisions and behavior were not liked by everyone in Catalonia. Luis did not want to learn Spanish, clashed with journalists, and did not accept the mentality of Spanish and South American footballers. Instead, he continued to surround himself with compatriots. In the summer of '98, Patrick Kluivert, Dwyn Zenden, and Philip Cocu became players of the Blue and Garnet. While the Dutchman won trophies, he had an indisputable argument in his favor, but in the '99-2000 campaign he decided to do it this time. This time Blaugranos reached the semi-finals of the Champions League, but finished second in La Liga, which could be forgiven for many, but not for the willful Van Gaal, who never became his own in Barcelona. Not waiting for dismissal, which looked very likely, Luis resigned, and very few in Catalonia regretted it. And it must be admitted, the fans of Barcelona had a much more significant reason for disappointment. That same summer of 2000, they experienced a shocking loss of Luis Figo. Unlike Van Gaal, the Portuguese in 5 years became a favorite and a real hero in the eyes of the fans, but then scandalously moved to Real Madrid, instantly turning into enemy number one for them. It was Figo's departure that marked the beginning of a 3-year crisis period for the Blue and Garnet. The loss of the beloved leader could only be compensated by the result, but Lorenzo Serra-Ferrer, not replacing him with Carlos Rexach, could not even come close to returning the club to the championship race. What can I say, even both fourth places, Barcelona, occupied with great difficulty and adventures. The then president of the club, Joan Gaspart, performed his duties extremely ineptly, which was especially noticeable in transfer and personnel issues, and his biggest mistake was the return to Camp Nou of Van Gaal, who left, clearly burning bridges. Against this background, no one expected great achievements from Luis, but he not only failed, it was a disaster. That 2002-2003 La Liga season became one of the worst in the history of Barcelona, which in February found itself in 15th position. Luis quickly lost his job, and Gaspart soon followed him. Fortunately for Catalan fans, Radimir Antic, who replaced Van Gaal in the coaching chair, managed to save face for the Catalan giant. He managed to finish the season with the team in 6th place, which looked like a local breakthrough, but it was still obvious that the Catalan club needed very serious changes. In the summer of 2003, the Blue and Garnets found themselves at a crossroads. Several people claimed the presidency, but the victory was won by lawyer by education and native of Barcelona Joan Laporta, who gained a record 52% of the votes. An important part of his victory was the support of Cruyff himself, as well as a wise move during the election campaign. Wishing to win the sympathy of voters, Laporta promised that he would be able to lure David Beckham to Camp Nou. This step was supposed to be both a serious reinforcement for the Catalans and a far-sighted marketing solution. In terms of media, the Englishman had almost no equals. Jumping a little ahead, it is worth noting that Joan did not keep his promise. Beckham replenished the ranks of the Madrid Galacticos. But, as the future showed, this was even for the best. Instead of David, Ronaldinho became a player of Barcelona, who in the next 5 years conquered the hearts of not only Catalan fans but also the entire football world. An important role in the transfer of the Brazilian was played by Sandro Rosell, Laporta's ally, who became vice president along with him. And here it is necessary to highlight another important point. Joan came with a clear plan to revive the club and intended to implement it not himself, but with the help of like-minded people. In addition to the mentioned Rosell, the team of the new president included Ferran Soriano, who was responsible for marketing, Marc Ingla, appointed general manager, and Tsiki Begiristain, who became the football director. All of them were not only professionals in their field but also shared Laporta's views, who wanted to return Blaugrana's partially lost identity and leading positions in the hierarchy of world football. Joan and his allies faced several difficult tasks: to rid the club of the €150 million debt that had formed during the activities of their predecessors, and also to find a suitable coach, which was especially important in the light of previous personnel mistakes. The main candidates for the vacant position were considered Ronald Koeman, who showed himself worthily in Ajax, and the experienced Gus Hiddink, but their financial demands did not fit into the rational strategy chosen by Laporta. Realizing the complexity and responsibility of the situation, Joan turned to Johan Cruyff for advice and heard not the most obvious answer. The great Dutchman suggested appointing Frank Rijkaard, who had very modest experience working at the club level, and not very successful at that. Under his leadership, Sparta, from Rotterdam for the first time in its history left the Eredivisie. Despite a thorough and thoughtful approach, as well as several interesting transfer decisions, Laporta's first year at the helm of Barcelona turned out to be very difficult for him. The president had conflicts with a separate fan group, and Rijkaard's results at first left much to be desired, and that's putting it mildly. After all, after 18 rounds, Blaugranas were in a shameful 12th position, not long before that losing at Camp Nou to Madrid's Real. Many Catalan media demanded Rijkaard's dismissal. Rosell also held this opinion, which led to their quarrel with Joan. But the president did not bend under pressure. Instead of listening to the opinion of the majority and even the main ally, he expressed support for the Dutch coach and looked at the problem from a completely different angle, thanks to which he pulled off one of the key deals in the history of Barcelona. Edgar Davids was a special footballer throughout his career. Understandably, he is primarily remembered for playing in glasses, but this noticeable and recognizable attribute never overshadowed his footballing qualities. In his position, he was one of the best in the world. However, in the 2003-2004 season, after long and successful years at Juventus, Marcelo Lippi decided to put the pitbull on the leash of the substitutes bench. It was during that period that Barcelona approached the old lady with an offer, and in the winter of 2004, the Dutchman moved to Camp Nou. The arrival of the nearly 31-year-old midfielder did not particularly excite Catalan fans. They wanted to see a star striker, but instead, they got an aging defensive midfielder without much recent playing time. Many fans resigned themselves to the idea that the season was completely lost, so the subsequent events were like a fairy tale to them. As soon as the fierce Davids got down to business, Blaugrana's play transformed and took on new colors. Starting from the 20th round, when Edgar debuted, Barcelona went on a fantastic run of 18 matches, losing only twice, and even managed to take revenge on Real Madrid at Santiago Bernabéu. The Catalans set such a pace that at one point they almost returned to the championship race, but a few stumbles at the finish line prevented them from performing a miracle. Nevertheless, the fans were happy, watching their team transform. Davids created the necessary balance in the midfield that Rijkaard's charges clearly lacked. Thanks to the pitbull, Xavi operated higher up the field and had complete freedom for creativity, which in turn helped him more productively connect the midfield and attack. But what's even more important, Edgar, who stayed at Camp Nou for only half a season, essentially saved Rijkaard from dismissal, thus changing the future of football. In the summer of 2004, Barcelona had an excellent transfer campaign. Samuel Eto'o, Deco, and Ludovic Juli became key players, and the inimitable Ronaldinho finally took on the role of the first violin. He had already amazed fans with his play in his debut season, but over the next 2 years, it was not just skill, it was real magic. Like a magician who taunted opponents by constantly showing his tricks and illusions, Barcelona also shone brightly, from a position of strength, winning 2 consecutive league titles, and along with them the Champions League. After all the criticism and dissatisfaction, Rijkaard was nearly carried on hands by De La Portu, and deservedly so. The Dutch coach had his undeniable advantages. He did everything to allow creative players to freely engage in their craft, adhered to a football philosophy that was in harmony with the canons created by Cruyff, and, of course, skillfully integrated young Andres Iniesta and Lionel Messi into the team. However, Rijkaard also had shortcomings, which became noticeable in the following 2 seasons. Even in the best of times under Frank, Barcelona sometimes lacked stability and motivation, and after several triumphs, it was even harder for the Dutchman to maintain these qualities at the necessary level. Moreover, he lost control over the locker room, which had devastating consequences. The results spoke for themselves. After such a successful stretch, the Catalans remained without trophies for 2 seasons. Although Laporta was not particularly eager to part with Rijkaard, he understood that the team was moving in the wrong direction. Frank's departure was not scandalous, but it was necessary. Continuing to follow the course of Catalan identity, in the summer of 2008, Joan made a risky but logical appointment. Barcelona was led by former player Josep Guardiola, who had only 1 year of coaching experience, previously with the second team of the Blue and Garnet. This step did not seem the most obvious due to Pep's youth, but he immediately showed that a lack of experience would not prevent him from making decisive decisions. Having just taken office, Guardiola encroached on the sacred, getting rid of Ronaldinho, followed by Deco and Gianluca Zambrotta. For Josep, who went through La Masia and spent most of his career at Barcelona, the emblem on the chest of the blue and garnet shirt meant everything, so he could not allow a lukewarm attitude to the matter and violation of discipline. But Pep's main advantage over all other candidates was his commitment to the ideas and philosophy of Cruyff. Guardiola had played under Johan for many years, absorbing knowledge and constantly learning. But when he himself became a coach, he did not try to copy the Dutchman's tactical scheme, but rather modernized it to his taste. Total ball control, constant movement of players in search of free space, and high pressing, Josep's new style soon received the name tiki-taka, although he himself did not particularly like this definition. Guardiola sought to always possess the ball and dominate, so players like Iniesta and Xavi began to play an even more important role in the team mechanism. But the development of young Messi became Pep's main priority, as he saw Lionel as the future of Barca and, of course, was not mistaken. Despite the slight apprehension of the fans, Barcelona under Guardiola's management had not just a successful, but a cosmic 2008-2009 season, winning 6 trophies out of 6 possible. It was an unprecedented success, but what is most important, not episodic. In the following campaign, Blaugranas once again won La Liga, and a year later they had another triumphant march. The Catalan monster became the champion of Spain for the 3rd time in a row and in the usual dominating style took another Champions League. "This is the best team I've faced in all my coaching career," said Manchester United coach Sir Alex Ferguson after that lost final, and it was especially pleasant praise, because the great Scotsman had seen everything in football. After defeating the Red Devils, many began to talk about Pep surpassing his teacher, and his Barcelona even being stronger and more successful than Cruyff's dream team. Such a position sounded justified. Guardiola carefully and pedantically built his team, and before the start of that fantastic 10-11 campaign, he made 2 brilliant signings in the form of David Villa and Javier Mascherano, each of whom became an integral part of the triumph. After such personnel reinforcement, there were simply no weak spots in Josep's team. Blaugranas were superbly staffed, they stood out especially. Iniesta and Xavi were considered the best players in the world in their positions, and Messi was simply the best footballer on the planet. The only relatively unsuccessful stretch for Pep at the helm of Barcelona was the 11-12 season when he managed to take only the Copa del Rey among the main tournaments, but overall, the 4-year period of his work still looked amazing. He won an incredible 14 trophies and joined the ranks of the greatest coaches in football history. But despite all Guardiola's success, there was also a downside to his approach. Being meticulous in studying opponents and maniacally dedicating himself to his work, Josep burnt out in 4 years, which affected the results of the last season.
By the time Pep left, the president of Barcelona was no longer Laporta. In 2010, he was replaced by Rosell, who had left the post of vice president 5 years earlier due to a conflict with Joan. Under the leadership of Sandro, the Catalan club began to change, and these changes were not for the better. In the coaching chair, Guardiola was replaced by his assistant Tito Vilanova, but he had an ambiguous 12-13 season. Yes, Barca managed to regain the league title, but at the same time, they lost to Bayern Munich in the Champions League semi-finals with a total score of 0-7. As is known, everything is known in comparison, and it soon turned out that Vilanova performed quite decently. In the 13-14 campaign, Barcelona was led by Gerardo Martino, under whose leadership the team failed on all fronts, not winning a single significant trophy. Therefore, in the summer of 14, another reshuffle took place on the Catalan coaching bridge, and the respected at Camp Nou Luis Enrique became the new coach of Blaugranas. Perfectly understanding that Barcelona conquered all the main football peaks by practicing attacking football, he focused on the front line, and this was very logical. Parallel to Enrique, another Luis Suarez arrived in Catalonia, who became the third and final element of the famous MSN link. Understandably, the stunning achievement of Blaugranas in the 14-15 season is the merit of not only the attacking trio. The same Xavi and Iniesta, Alves, and Jordi Alba played very important roles, but still, the combination of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar made such a big difference that all others paled in comparison. In that unforgettable campaign, MSN had an incredible 122 goals scored, which became the best indicator of all time. But what's even more important, the unstoppable trio's goals allowed Barcelona to win the Golden Treble, which few expected from Enrique. The loud success of the Catalans looked somewhat unexpected, but the main delight was the ease that blew from Barcelona's game. Before coming to Camp Nou, Luis was not considered a top coach, nor did he become one after the treble, but specifically for Blaugranas, Enrique was the ideal candidate, as he knew the local mentality perfectly. But as impressive as Enrique's start at the helm of the Blue and Garnet was, he did not last long at the conquered peak. In the new 15-16 season, Barcelona won the Golden Double, taking La Liga and the Copa del Rey, and in the 16-17 campaign, among significant trophies, they were limited to only the National Cup. After 3 years of productive work, Luis left the club, but the improvement did not follow, and could not follow, because the problem was far from him. The leadership of Barcelona acted without any system, ineptly, and sometimes even illegally. Sins leaked from the crevices due to his successor, Josep Bartomeu, who was remembered for his wastefulness and catastrophic mistakes in the transfer market. Barcelona stagnated, sinking deeper into the abyss of the economic crisis, to the point that last summer they lost their face and main symbol, Lionel Messi. And even the returning president Joan Laporta could not prevent the departure of the victorious Argentine. For many fans, especially young ones, the current Barcelona began with Guardiola and Messi, but this, of course, is far from the case. The main figure from which the greatness of Blaugranas should be counted is undoubtedly Johan Cruyff, who carried out a real revolution in the Catalan club. Returning to Camp Nou as a coach, the Dutchman did extensive work, radically changing the face and mentality of Barcelona. Before his arrival, the Blue and Garnet were not an equivalent to Real Madrid, but then everything changed. Cruyff confirmed the effectiveness of his approach with current results, creating the glorious Dream Team, and his foresight was expressed in systematics. Take, for example, the famous academy La Masia, which was created even before Johan's arrival. However, it was he who reformatted the academy and made it one of the best football schools on the planet. A very important indicator of a coach's genius has always been his legacy, and few can compare with Cruyff in this regard. Johan penetrated the consciousness of Barcelona's players and fans, changing their identity and sowing the seed of greatness. Since then, the Blaugranas have positioned themselves as a grand, and any place other than the first was perceived as a failure. After the departure of the Dutchman, his work was successfully continued by Robson, and not only in terms of trophies. Like Cruyff, Sir Bobby was an embodiment of coaching thought and significantly influenced the thinking of Guardiola and Luis Enrique, who eventually became worthy followers of Catalan traditions. Against the background of Johan's contribution to the development of the club, the achievements of his compatriot Van Gaal fade, but there is one fundamental difference between them that categorically affects the perception of their merits. If Cruyff fell in love with Barcelona and was so imbued with its culture and mentality that he even named his son after the city's patron St. George, then Luis was alien to local customs. He did not want to delve into such nuances, trying to create a new Ajax in Catalonia by constantly acquiring Dutch footballers, which did not particularly please the fans and, despite decent results, led to the expected parting. At the beginning of this century, the Blaugranas experienced a difficult storm, not only financial but also in terms of results, after which a new glorious page in their history began, written by Laporta. Some may think that the position of head of Barcelona brings huge benefits to its holder, but in reality, everything is not so simple. The specifics of Barcelona's management apparatus are such that the members of the board of directors do not receive a salary, but themselves provide a financial guarantee of €1.5 million. Being an ideological supporter of Catalonia and the main club of the region, Jones sincerely wanted to correct the situation, and thanks to a rational and systematic approach, as well as a team of equally dedicated professionals, he succeeded. And here it is very important to note how Laporta in each individual situation was able to make the perfect decision. For example, in the case of Ronaldinho, he listened to Rosell, and Barcelona got a future legend. And then, on the contrary, he ignored the opinion of Sandro and most of the media, not firing Rijkaard. Also, separately, it is worth remembering the skillful transfers that Jones made. First of all, of course, the fateful signing of Davids, and the purchase of such masters as Eto'o, Deco, Dani Alves, and Thierry Henry should not be forgotten. And the cherry on top of Laporta's activities should be considered the somewhat adventurous appointment of Guardiola, which ultimately turned out to be brilliant. The president did not focus on merits but chose people consonant in convictions with Cruyff's philosophy, which he considered the embodiment of the Catalan football mentality, and this was another pinpoint hit. After all, Josep not only carried out a new revolution in Barcelona, he made global changes in the world of football tactics, reinterpreting total football in his own way. At the same time, Guardiola did not need to invite big stars, he relied on academy graduates, who were imbued with local values and traditions from childhood. During Pep's tenure, 22 graduates of La Masia debuted in the first team, and there is perhaps no better proof of his commitment to Barcelona. But as strange as it may sound, Barcelona's greatness and strength, to a certain extent, are owed to the hated Real Madrid, led by Mourinho. Every hero must have an antagonist, and the Catalans had it in the form of the Blancos, with such a villain named José. And here, the fact that Mourinho and Guardiola were closely acquainted since the times of Robson, both being his students and followers, added fuel to the fire of the confrontation. But if Josep continued to glorify Barcelona, José chose Real Madrid, making him even more hated by the Catalans. Despite Guardiola's dizzying success, it was the Portuguese who was considered the best coach on the planet at the time of his arrival in Madrid. Mourinho already had 2 Champions League triumphs and a whole series of national titles under his belt, so he became the perfect irritant for Blaugranas, raising the principle of El Clásico to a whole new level. By the way, something similar was observed in the middle of the last decade, when Blaugranas won the Golden Treble with Luis Enrique. Winning the Champions League is always nice, but taking the European crown from the worst enemy is twice as pleasant. The revival of Blaugranas began with Laporta, who now sits in the presidential chair, and the team is now led by Xavi, one of the smartest and most talented graduates of La Masia. He is thoroughly imbued with Catalan identity and philosophy, he extols local values and customs, so who, if not him, is capable of returning Barcelona to its rightful place on the world football Olympus?